The story of Hrafnkell, Freyr's priest. Chapter 1. It was in the days of King Harald Fairhair that a man brought his ship to Iceland, into Breatdal, his name being Hallfroder. Breatdal is a countryside down below that of Flotsdalar. On board his ship was his wife and son, who was hight Hrafnkell, who was then 15 winters old, a hopeful man and a goodly. Hallfroder set up household. In the course of the winter there died a servant maid of foreign kin, whose name was Arnthruder, hence the name of the place Anthruderstather. In the spring Hallfroder moved his house northward over the heath, and set up a home at a place called Gatedalar. One night he dreamt that there came a man to him and said, "There liest thou, Hallfroder, and rather unwarily. Flit thy house away west across the Lagerflot, for there all thy good luck awaits thee." Thereupon he awoke and flitted his belongings down valley across Ranga into the tongue to a spot which has since been called Hallfroderstather, and there he dwelt into a good old age. In breaking up from Gaitdalar, he had left a goat and a buck behind, and the same day that Hallfroder left, an earth slip struck the house, and there these two creatures were lost. Hence the name Gatedalar, which this place has borne ever since. Chapter 2. Hrafnkell made it his wont to ride upon the heaths in the summer seasons. At this time Jökuldalr was all settled as high as the bridge. Once Hrafnkell rode up along Fljótsdalshérað and saw that a certain void valley stretched up beyond Jökuldalr, which seemed to him to be a better settlement than other valleys which he had seen already. And when he came home, he asked his father to share him out his part in the property, saying that he was minded to set up house in the valley. This his father granted him, and in the valley he had found he made an abode for himself, which he called Athelbol. Hrafnkell got for wife Oddbjörg, daughter of Shafdulfr from Laxaldalar, with whom he begat 2 sons, the older hight Thorir, the younger Osborn. And when Hrafnkell had hallowed for himself the land of Athelbol, he held a great sacrificial feast, and a great temple too he reared up there. Hrafnkell loved no other god before Frey, and to him he made offerings of all the best things he had, going half shares. Hrafnkell settled the whole of the valley, bestowing lands on other people on condition of being their chief, and thus he assumed priesthood over them. From this it came to pass that his name was lengthened, and he was called freysgoða. He was a man of right unruly ways, but a well-mannered man notwithstanding. He asserted the authority of a priest over all the men of Jökuldalr. Hrafnkell was meek and blithe towards his own people, but stern and cross-grained towards those of Jökuldalr, who never got fair dealings with him. He busied himself much with single combats, and for no man did he pay a weregild, and one never brought him to do boot for whatever he might have done. The countryside of Fljótsdalr is a right difficult one to traverse, stony and sloughy, yet father and son would be constantly riding to see each other, for between them there was much fondness of love. Hallfredr thought the common way was too difficult of passing, so he sought for a new road above the fells, which stand in the countrysides of Fljótsdalr, where he found a drier one, although a longer, which ever since has been called the Gate of Hallfroder. This road is traversed only by those who are well acquainted with the countrysides. Chapter 3. There was a man named Bjarni who dwelt at a stead called Langerhus in Hrafnkelsdalar. He was married and had begotten sons with his wife, one of whom was called Samar, the other Eyvinder, goodly men and promising. Eyvinder stayed at home with his father, but Samar was married and had his abode on the northern side of the valley at a place called Lake Scholar, and was right well off for livestock. Samar was a turbulent fellow, and skilled in law withal, but Eyvinder became a traveller, and went to Norway, where he dwelt for the first winter. From there he went abroad into foreign lands, coming at last to a stay in Constantinople, where he was right honourably received by the Greek king, and where for a while he spent his time. Of all his possessions there was one for which Hrafnkell had greater fondness than any other. This was a horse of a roan colour, which he called Freymane. He gave unto his friend Frey the half of this horse, and so great a love had he for it that he made a solemn vow that he would kill anyone who should ride the horse without his leave. Chapter 4. A man was hight Thorbjorn, brother of Bjarni, who dwelt at a stead in Hrafnkell called Hull, situated across the valley right against Athelbol on the eastern side. Thorbjorn was a man of scanty means, but of many useless mouths. The eldest of his sons was called Einar. He was a tall man, and well mannered withal. It so happened one spring that Thorbjorn said to Einar that he had better try to secure some place for himself. For, said he, I am in want of no more work that can be done by the hands that are here already. But thou wilt find it easy to secure a situation, able and skilful as thou art. It is not for any want of love that I thus call upon thee to go away, for thou art to me the most useful of all my children, but it is because of my small means and poverty. But my other children must grow up labourers, but as for thee, thou wilt find it easier to get a place than they. Einar answered, Too late hast thou let me know of this, as now all places and situations, the best of them at least, are already arranged for, and I deem it an undesirable thing to have to accept only the worst. Now Einar took his horse and rode to Athelbol, where Hrafnkell sat in his chamber, and received him well and joyfully. Einar applied for a situation with Hrafnkell, and he answered, Why ask it so late for this? Otherwise I would have taken thee the first of all men. Now I have secured all my servants, except for that one business which I fear thou art not minded to undertake. Einar asked what it was. Hrafnkell answered, he had got no one to take charge of his sheep, but said he was in great need of one. Einar said he did not mind what work he did, whether this or any other, but said he would like to settle with him for cloth and board wages. I'll make a short bargain with you, said Hrafnkell. Thy business shall be to watch 15 ewes at the mountain dairy, and gather and carry home faggots for summer fuel. On these terms thou shalt take service with me for 2 half years. But a one thing I must give thee, as all my shepherds to understand. Freymane goes grazing in the valley with his band of mares. Thou shalt take care of him winter and summer. But I warn thee of one thing, namely, that thou shalt never be on his back on any condition whatever, for I am bound by a mighty vow to slay the man that should ever have a ride on him. There are 12 mares with him. Whichever of these thou mayest want night and day is at your service. Do now as I tell thee, and mind the old saw, no blame is borne by those who warn. Now thou knowest what I have said. Einar said he trusted he was under no such luckless spell as to ride on a horse which was forbidden, least of all when there were other horses at his disposal. Chapter 5. Now Einar goes home for his clothes and betakes himself to Athelbol. Thereupon they brought the milking stock to the mountain dairy up in Hrafnkelsdalar, which was set up at a place called Icelandic. During the summer all went in a fair way with Einar, so that never a ewe was missing up to midsummer. But then, one night, it came to pass that nearly 30 of them had strayed away. Einar went all over the sheep walks, searching without finding any, and for nearly a week the sheep were missing. One morning Einar rose early, and coming out, found that all the fog from the south and the drizzle had lifted, and so he takes into his hand a staff and a bridle and a riding rug. Then he went on, passing Grotsig saw, which ran above the dairy. On the shingly flats by the river were lying about all the sheep that had been home in the evening before. These he drove home towards the dairy, and then went in search of those that were wanting. He now saw the stud horses further afield on the flats, and was minded to secure one of them to ride on, knowing that he would cover ground more quickly by riding than by walking. And when he came to the horses, he had to run about after them, they being now shy, though never before they used to run away from anyone, except Freymane alone. He was as quiet as if stuck in the ground. Einar, seeing that the morning was passing off, thought that Hrafnkell surely would never know if he rode upon the horse, and so he took it, put on it the bridle and the riding rug on his back under himself, and rode up past the gorge of Grota, and further up towards the glaciers, then along the Jökull, beneath which Jökullsa runs, and then down along the river unto the dairy of Reykir. He asked all shepherds at the sundry dairies if any of them had set their eyes upon the sheep, but no one professed to have seen them. Einar rode Freymane from the first streak of dawn until middle eve, and the horse took him quickly over the ground and far, for it was the best of horses. Then it came into Einar's mind that it was time already to drive home to the dairy the sheep which were still in safe keeping, letting alone those that he could not find. So he rode to the eastward over the mountain necks into Hrafnkelsdalar, but as he came down by Grotsager, he heard the bleating of sheep along the river gorge, even where he had ridden close by before, and turning thither, sees how 30 ewes come running along towards him, even the very ones which had been missing for a whole week already. And these, with the rest of the ewes, he drove along home to the dairy. The horse was all foaming with sweat, so that every hair on him was dripping. Bespattered he was all over with mire, and mightily blown. 12 times he rolled himself, and then he set up a mighty neighing, and then set off at a swift pace down along the beaten tracks. Einar ran forthwith after him, endeavouring to overtake him, and to lay hand on him and bring him back to the horses. But now Freymane was so shy that Einar could get nowhere near him. Thus the horse ran down all along the valley, never stopping until it came home to Athelbol. At the time Hrafnkell sat at table, and when the horse came before the door it neighed aloud. Hrafnkell told one of the handmaidens who were serving at table to go to the door, for I heard the neighing of a horse, and meseemed the neighing was like to that of Freymane. She went out to the door, and there beheld Freymane in a most ungainly plight. She told Hrafnkell that Freymane stood outside the door, most ill-favoured of look. "What is the matter with the champion that he should come home as at this time?" says Hrafnkell. "Sure that bodes no good." Then he went out and saw Freymane and spoke to him. "I am sorry to see thee in this kind of plight, my pet. However, thou hadst all thy wits about thee in thus coming to let me know what is the matter. Due revenge shall be taken for this, and now thou mayest go back to thy company." And forthwith Freymane walked up the valley again to join the stud. Chapter 6. In the evening Hrafnkell went to his bed as usual, and slept through the night. In the morning he had a horse brought home to him, and ordered it to be saddled, and rode up to the dairy. He rode in blue raiment. He had an axe in his hand, but no other weapons about him. At that time Einar had just driven the ewes into the pen, and lay on the wall of the pen, casting up the number of the sheep. But the women were busy a milking. They all greeted Hrafnkell, and he asked how they got on. Einar answered, I have had no good speed myself, for no less than 30 ewes were missing for a week, though now I have found them again. Hrafnkell said he had no fault to find with tidings of that kind. It has not happened so often as might have been expected that thou hast lost the ewes. But has not something worse befallen than that? Didst thou not have a ride on Frey yesterday? Einar said he could not gainsay that utterly. Why didst thou ride on this horse which was forbidden thee, while there were plenty of others on which thou art free to ride? Now this one trespass I should have forgiven thee, if I had not used words of such earnest already. And yet thou hast manfully confessed thy guilt. But by reason of the belief that those who fulfil their vows never come to grief, he leapt off his horse, sprang upon Einar, and dealt him his death blow. After that, having done the deed, he rode home to Athelbol, and there told these tidings. He got him another shepherd to take charge of the dairy, but he had Einar's dead body brought westward upon the terrace by the dairy, and there set up a beacon beside his cairn, and it is called Einar's beacon, where, when the sun is right above it, they count mid-eve hour at the dairy. Chapter 7. The news of Einar, his son's, death was brought over to Thorbjorn at Hull, and he was mightily grieved at the tidings. He now took his horse and rode over to Athelbol to ask Hrafnkell to do boot for his son. Hrafnkell said that he had slain many a man besides this one, for thou must know that I never pay weregild to any man, and yet people have to rest content with things so done. Yet I allow it that I think that this my deed is rather of the worst kind among the manslaughters which I have wrought hitherto. Thou, too, hast been a neighbour of mine for a long while, and I have had a good liking for thee, and we have enjoyed one another's favour. And no small tiding would have brought matters to an evil pass between me and Einar, if only he had not ridden this horse. But now I have to regret that I spoke too much, and seldomer indeed should we have to regret that which we say too little than that which we say too much. And now I shall show that I consider this deed of mine a worse one than other deeds that I have done, inasmuch as I will supply thy house with dairy produce during the summer, and with slaughtered meat when autumn comes. And in the same way I will do to thee, as long as thou art minded to keep a house. Thy sons and daughters we shall fit out at my cost, and so endow them as to make their conditions desirable. And all that thou knowest my house to contain, and of which thou mayest stand in need in future, thou shalt let me know of, nor henceforth shalt thou be in want of those things which may be requisite unto thee. Thou shalt keep house as long as thou takest pleasure therein, but when thou art tired thereof, thou shalt come to me, and I will take care of thee until thy dying day. Let this be our atonement, and likely it seems to me that most people will say that this man was dearly paid for. This offer I will not accept, says Thorbjorn. What then? says Hrafnkell. Then spake Thorbjorn, I will that we name an umpire between us. Answered Hrafnkell, then thou holdest thyself as good a man as I. The peace between us is at an end. Then Thorbjorn rode away and down towards Hrafnkell's Dalar. He came to Langerhus and met his brother Bjarni, and told him the tidings, asking him at the same time to lend him a hand in these matters. Bjarni answered, saying that Hrafnkell was his equal to deal with, for though we have plenty of money to dispose of, we are not the men to plunge into a strife with such a man. And sooth indeed is the old saw, know one thing, know thyself. He has made lawsuits difficult for many a one who have been mightier men of their hands than we are. And it seems to me that thou hast been somewhat short of wits in refusing such a good offer, and I will have nothing to do with this. Thorbjorn overwhelmed his brother with abuse, saying that there was in him the less of manhood, the more he was to be depended upon. So he rode away, and the two brothers parted in little love. He did not stop until he came down to Lake's Caller, where he knocked at the door, and people answered the knock and came out. Thorbjorn asked Sommer to come out to see him. Sommer greeted his kinsman well, and asked him to put up there. Thorbjorn answered it slowly somewhat. Seeing that Thorbjorn was downcast, Sommer asked him for tidings, and Thorbjorn told him the slaughter of his son Einar. That is no great tidings, said Sommer, if Hrafnkell slays a man. Thorbjorn asked if Sommer was minded to lend him any help, for such is the nature of the case, that though the man is nearest and dearest to me, yet the blow has been dealt no way from malice. Hast thou tried to have any redress of Hrafnkell? Said Sommer. Thorbjorn told all truthfully as to what had passed between him and Hrafnkell. Never before did I know Hrafnkell to make such an offer to any man as those he has made to thee, said Sommer. Now I will ride with thee up to Athelbol, and let us come before Hrafnkell in a humble mind, and see if he will still hold to the same offers. And I doubt not that he will behave honourably in the matter. Says Thorbjorn, this is to be said, both that Hrafnkell will now refuse, and that such is no more in my mind now than it was when I rode away from there. Sommer says, heavy enough, I guess, will it be to strive with Hrafnkell in matters of law. Thorbjorn answers, this is why ye young men never come to aught, that ye flinch at all things, and I am minded to think that no man has got such milksops for kinsmen as I have. It seems to me that a man like you is putting himself in a right false position, being skilled in law and eager for petty cases, but refusing to take up this case, a great and urgent one. Thou shalt be widely reviled for this, as indeed thou deservest, being known as the most boisterous man in our kin. And I now see how the matter turns. Sommer answered, by how much art thou the better off than before, even if I should take up the case, and we should both be worsted together? Thorbjorn answered, it would be a great relief to my mind if thou shouldst undertake it, no matter how after it should turn out. Sommer said, I am right unwilling to engage in this, and it is only for the sake of kinship that I do it. But thou must know that in thee I deem that I have no avail of any kind. Then Sommer gave his hand, and took the case off Thorbjorn's hand. Chapter 8. Now Sommer took a horse, and rode up the valley unto a certain stead, where he declared the manslaughter, and after that he gathered men against Hrafnkell. Hrafnkell heard of this, and thought it a laughable affair that Sommer should have undertaken a blood suit against him. And thus the winter and the next summer pass away. When the days of the summonses pass by, Sommer rode away from home up to Athelbol, and summoned Hrafnkell for the manslaughter of Einar. After that he rode down the valley, and called upon the good men to come to the thing. Hrafnkell too sent messengers down along Jökuldalr, and charged his men to come, and thus from his own jurisdiction he brought together 70 men. With this band he rode eastward over Fjótsdalshérað, across it past the upper end of the water, then straight across the neck unto Shrítudalr, and up along the same valley and south unto Uxarhæthi, on the way to Beru Friordor, and the straight thing road to Sitha. From Fljótsdalr there are 17 days' journey unto Thingvellir. Now when Hallfróðr had ridden away from the countryside, Samur gathered men together, and most of those that he brought together, and who formed his following, were only country tramps. Unto these men Samur gave both weapons and clothes and victuals. Samur struck another route out of the valley. He first went north to the bridge and then over the bridge, and thence into Muthrudalshaithi, putting up at Muthrudalr for the night. Thence they rode unto Hertherbreistunga, and so on above Blafjul, and thence into Kroksdalr, and so southward unto the sand, whence they came down into Sautafell, whence unto Thingvull, where Hrafnkell had not arrived as yet, the reason of his slower travelling being the longer road he had to do. Samur tilts a booth for his men, but nowhere near the East Firth men were wont to tilt. Now shortly after this Hallfróðr arrived and tilted his booth as had been his wont here before. He heard that Samur was at the Thing, and that he found that right laughable. The Thing was a very crowded one, and at it there were most of the lords of the land. Samur went to all the chieftains, asking them for help and avail, but they all answered one way, saying each that they had nothing good to requite Samur, so as to join him in strife at law against priest Hrafnkell, and thus to hazard their honour. They also say that most of those who ever had contentions at law with Hrafnkell had fared one way, and that in all such cases as had men set up against him, he had worsted them all. Samur went home to his booth, and in a downcast frame of mind the two kinsmen were misdoubting that their affairs would come to such an utter downfall, as that they would only reap from it shame and disgrace, and in so deep an anxiety were both of them fallen, that they might have no enjoyment either of food or sleep, because all the chieftains refused all assistance to them, even those upon whose help they had counted most. Chapter 9. It so fell early one morning that the old carle Thorbjorn was awake. He roused Samur from his sleep and bade him stand up, for now it behoves not to slumber. Samur stood up and put on his raiment. They went abroad, walking down to Oxará below the bridge, where they washed themselves. Thorbjorn spake to Samur, "It is my counsel now that thou cause our horses to be driven up, and that we get ready to return home, for it is easy to see that here nothing is waiting us but utter shame." Samur answered, "That is well enough, since thou wouldst hear of nothing but striving with Hrafnkell, and didst not choose to accept offers that many a man who had lost a near kinsman would have been fain to take. With hard reproaches thou didst egg on my mind, doing the same to others, who are not willing to enter the case with thee. But as for me, I shall never give in, until I deem that all hope is past of my ever being able to bring things further about." This came so close home to Thorbjorn that he wept. Then they saw how, on the western side of the river, only a bit further down than where they were sitting, 5 men walked together out of a certain booth. He who was at the head of them, and walked abreast of them, was a tall man, not of a stout build to look at, arrayed in a leaf-green kirtle, in his hand a sword ornamented. A straight-faced man he was, and ruddy of hue, and of a goodly presence, light auburn of hair, which was fast growing hoary. This was a man easy to know, as he had a light lock in his hair on the left side. Then Samar spoke. Stand we up and go we west across the river to meet these men. Now they went down along the river, and the leader of those men is the first to greet them, asking them who they were, to whom they answered as asked. Samar asked this man for his name. He said he was named Hrafnkell, and was the son of Tjostar. Samar asked where his family was, and where he had got a home. The other said he was a Westfirther by kin and origin, and that his abode was in Thorskefjordur. Questioned Samar, Art thou a man of a priesthood? Far from it, said the other. Art thou a bonder then? Said Samar. He said that was not so. Samar asked, What of a man art thou then? He answered, I am only a country tramp. I came out here last summer, having been for 7 winters abroad, having fared all the way to Constantinople, being now a henchman of the king of the Greeks, and at this time staying with my brother, whose name is Thorgeir. Is he a man of a priesthood? Said Samar. Thorkel answered, A man of a priesthood he is indeed, both in Thorskefjordur and wide about elsewhere in the Westfirts. Is he here at the Thing? Said Samar. To be sure, said Thorkel. How many men has he got with him? Said Samar. About 70 men, said Thorkel. Are there more of ye brothers? Said Samar. A third one still, said Thorkel. Who is he? Says Samar. He is hight Thormodr, said Thorkel, and dwells at Gardar on Alptanes, and is married to Thordis, the daughter of Thorolfr Skallagrimson of Borg. Art thou minded at all to bear us a hand? Says Samar. What is it you want? Says Thorkel. To be backed up by the might of chieftains, says Samar, for we have affairs at law on hand against Hrafnkell the priest, for the manslaughter of Einar Thorbjarnarson. And if thou shouldst back us up, we as plaintiffs are confident of the case. Thorkel answered, As I told you, I am not a man of a priesthood. Why art thou stinted of thy share? Said Samar, being the son of a chieftain like the rest of thy brothers. Thorkel answered, I did not say that I was not possessed of a priesthood, but I handselled to my brother Thorgeir my rule of men before I went abroad, and since my return I have not resumed it, because I deem it well cared for, while he takes charge of it. Go ye to meet him, and ask him to look to you. He is a lordly minded man, and a noble hearted, and in every way of good conditions. A young man too, and ambitious withal. Such are the likeliest men to yield the assistance ye want. Samar says, We shall get nothing out of him unless thou backest up our suit as well. Thorkel answered, I will promise to be rather with you than against you, as it seems to me the necessity is urgent, that a suit should be brought on for a close relative. Go ye now to the booth, and go ye into the booth, now that all men are asleep. Ye will see, where there stands athwart the upper part of the floor, a couple of sleeping bags, out of one of which I have just arisen, and in the other of which there is resting still Thorgeir my brother. Since he came to the Thing he has suffered much from a suppurated foot, and has therefore slept little a night. But last night the boil burst, and the core is out. Since that he has been asleep, and has stretched the foot from under the clothes out over the footboard for relief from overheat. Let the old man go first, and let him go up to the booth. It seems to me that he is a right decrepit old fellow, both to sight and as to age. Now, my man, says Thorkel, when thou comest up to the sleeping bag, take care to trip hard, and come flopping down upon the footboard, and catch in the fall at the toe which is bandaged, and pull at it, and just see how he likes it. Samur said, "No doubt that thou art a man of wholesome counsel to us, but this seems to me hardly a wise thing to do." Thorkel answered, "One of two things you must do, to take what I advise, or not to come to me for a counsel at all." Samur spoke and said, "As he has counselled, so the thing shall be done." Thorkel said that he would come on later, for I am waiting for my men. Chapter 10. Now Samur and Thorbjorn went away and came into the booth where all men were asleep. They soon saw where Thorgeir was lying. The old carle Thorbjorn went first, and in a stumbling manner he walked. But when he came up to the sleeping bag, then he stumbled onto the footboard and clutched at the sore toe and pulled hard at it, while Thorgeir woke and jumped up in the sleeping bag and asked who he was who was going on so headlong as to rush upon people's sore feet. But Samur and his men had nothing to say for themselves. But in the same moment Thorkel sprang into the booth and said to Thorgeir his brother, "Be not so hasty and furious, kinsman, about this. It will do thee no harm, and people often do by chance things worse than they would, and to many a man it has happened to be unable to have his eye on all things, when his mind is overloaded with great things. No wonder, kinsman, that thou wouldst be so hurt in thy foot, which has so long been painful, and indeed that pain pinches thyself sharpest. But even so it may be that no less painful to an old man is the death of his son, for whom he can get no redress, being moreover a man pinched by every kind of want. No doubt he knows best his own pain, and is not to be wondered at that he should not be very heedful of all things, in whose mind mighty things are abiding." Thorgeir answered, "I did not know that he was to hold me responsible for this, for I did not kill his son, and he cannot therefore revenge this on me." "He nowise minded to be avenged on thee," said Thorkel, "but he came to thee at a faster pace than he could help, and paid for his dimness of sight in his eager hope of finding some support in thee. And a noble deed it would be to lend one's help to an old and needy man. This is to him a matter of necessity, not of choice, seeing that it is his son after whom he has to take up the suit. But now all the chieftains back out of all help to these men, and show therein a great want of great mindedness." Thorgeir answered, "Against whom have these men the plaint to bring?" Thorgeir answered, "Hrafnkel the priest has slain the son of Thorbjorn, sackless. One deed after another he works, never allowing redress to any one therefor." Thorgeir answered, "I shall belike fare the way of others, in not finding that I have any such good deed to requite to these men, as that I should go willingly into law struggles with Hrafnkell, for it seems that every summer he deals with those who have got cases to contest with him, so that most of them get little or no honour thereof in the end. In this way I have seen them fare every one. This, I guess, must be the cause why most men are so unwilling, whom necessity does not urge along." Thorkel answered, "It may be, if I were a chieftain, that I should fare in the same way, and that I should deem it ill to have to strive with Hrafnkell. But as I am, I look on that matter otherwise, for I should above all things choose to deal with such a man, before whom all men had come to grief already. And greatly should I deem that my honour has advanced, or the honour of any chieftain, by Hrafnkell being brought into some straits, whereas I should deem it undiminished if I fared no worse than others, as the proverb says, "'Tis not my curse what's common fate," and "Nothing venture, nothing gain." "Now I see," says Thorgeir, "how thy mind stands in the matter. Thou wilt lend these men thy assistance. Now I shall hand over to thee my priesthood and my rule of men, and have thou that which I had before. But after that we go even shares. But now thou back up whomsoever thou choosest." Answered Thorkel, "It seems to me that our priesthood will be best looked after by being longest in thy hands, and I should like no one better to have it than thee, for thou hast many things to make thee a man above all us brothers, whereas I have not made up my mind as to what I shall do with myself as at this time. Thou knowest, kinsman, that I have meddled in few things since I came to Iceland. I shall see what my counsels are held worth, for now I have pleaded this cause all I can at present. May be that Thorkel Leper may come forward hereafter in such a manner as that his words may be held of greater account." Thorgeir answered, "I see now, kinsman, how the matter stands, that thou art not pleased, which I cannot bear to think of, so we will lend these men our assistance if it be thy will, whatsoever end the affair may have." Thorkel answered, "Therefore I asked that it is my pleasure that the request be granted." "What do these men consider themselves able to do?" says Thorgeir, "so that thereby the success of their case may be better ensured?" "As I said before today," said Samar, "we want the assistance of chieftains, but the pleading of the case is in my hand." Thorgeir said it was then for him to show what he was good for, and now the thing to be done is to start the suit in the most correct manner. But methinks it is Thorkel's will that you come to meet him before judgment fall, and then you will have something for your pertinacity, either some comfort, or otherwise a humiliation still greater than before, and grief and heartburn. Now go ye home and be merry, for if ye are to strive with Hrafnkell, it behoves you to bear yourselves well and straightly for a while. But let no man be told that we have promised you any support." Now they went home to their booth and bore themselves right merrily. People wondered much at this, how they had so suddenly come to change their mind, seeing how downcast they were when they went away. Chapter 11. And now they sit quietly until the time when judgments were to be passed. Then Samar called together his men and went to the Mount of Laws, where the court was set. Then Samar came boldly forth to the court, calling witnesses forthwith. He pleaded his cause in a manner good in law against Hrafnkell the priest, without making mistakes, and with a frank and fearless manner of pleading. Then came up the sons of Theostar with a large following of men, all men from the west country joining them, whereby it was seen how well befriended the sons of Theostar were. Samar pleaded the cause unto judgment, until Hrafnkell was called upon to defend, or then he who should be there present who should come forward to keep up law defence for him, according as might be good and right in law. Samar's pleading was received with good cheer, and a question was put whether no one would bring forward a lawful defence on behalf of Hrafnkell. People rushed to the booth of Hrafnkell and told him what was doing. He started quickly, calling together his men, and went to the court, thinking that there would be just a poor defence of the coast, and thinking in his mind how he should make small men loath to set up cases against him, and was minded to break up the court for Samar and to hustle him out of the case. This, however, was not to be done now, there being already such a crowd of people that he could get nowhere near, and so was himself hustled away with great violence, even so that he could not hear the speaking of those who pleaded against him, and therefore was deprived of means to bring forward a lawful defence of his own behalf. But Samar pushed the suit to the full extent of law, until Hrafnkell, at this very thing, was made full outlaw. Hrafnkell went forthwith to his booth, and had his horses brought up, and rode away from the thing, mightily ill contented at the end of these affairs, for such he had never before experienced. So he rode east, over Lingascheidi, and further on to Sitha, and did not halt travelling until he came to Hrafnskeldalar, and settled in his home at Athelbol. He behaved as if nothing had happened, but Sommer remained behind at the thing, going about and bearing himself right struttingly. Many people thought it was well that the case should have come about in this way, and that Hrafnkell should have to come down once in a way, calling now to mind how many people he had dealt with unfairly before. Chapter 12. Sommer waited until the thing broke up and men got ready to return home. He thanked the brothers well for their assistance, and Thorgeir asked Sommer, laughingly, how he was pleased at the turn matters had taken. He signified his pleasure thereat, but Thorgeir asked, Deemest thou thyself now in any better case than before? Samur said, Methinks that Hrafnkell has had a right great shame of this, such as shall be long remembered, and I deem it to be worth as much as a great lot of money. Thorgeir said, A full outlaw the man is not yet, as long as the act of distress has not been executed, which must be done at his own home, not later than a fortnight after wapentake. It is called wapentake when all men ride away from the thing. But I guess, said Thorgeir, that Hrafnkell is come home, and means to sit at Athelbol, and I also hold likely that he will have taken to himself thy rule over men. But thou, I guess, art minded to ride home and to settle at thy house as best thou mayest, if such be possible. I guess, too, that thou deemest thou hast so brought about thy affairs as to declare him an outlaw, but I am minded to think that he will overawe people in the same manner as before, excepting that, as for thyself, thou wilt have to stoop even lower than ever. That I never mind, said Sommer. Thou art a brave man, said Thorgeir, and I think that my kinsman Thorkel is minded not to let it come to a poor end with thee, having made up his mind to accompany thee until a settlement of thy case with Hrafnkell be brought about, so that thou mayest sit at thy home in quiet. And thou, too, wilt think it is most due to us now to give thee our support, since already we had the most to do in thy affairs. Now for this once we shall accompany thee to the East Firths. But art thou acquainted with any road thither which is not a high road? Samur said he would go back the same way he had come from the east, and was now right glad at this offer. Chapter 13. Thorgeir selected the best men from his band, and charged 40 of them to accompany him. Samur, likewise, had 40 men in his following, and the whole band was well fitted out, both as to weapons and horses. So they rode all along the same way until they came into Jökuldalr one night as the fire of dawn was first lighting. They passed over the bridge on the river in the very morning when the act of distress was to be executed. Then asked Thorgeir how they could best come there unawares. For this Samur said he had a good advice, and out of the road he turned and up to the mountain side, and so along the neck between Hrafnskeldalr and Jökuldalr, until they came to the outer spur of the mountain, beneath which stood the homestead of Athelbol. There some grassy deans stretched up into the heath, and a steep slope stretched down into the valley, underneath which was the farmstead. Then Samur got off his horse and said, Let our horses be loose and be guarded by 20 men, while we, 60 together, rush upon the stead, where, I guess, few people will be upon their feet as yet. Now they did so, and there the Deans are called Horse Deans until this day. They were swiftly upon the farm. The time for rising was past, and yet the people had not got up. They broke the door open by a beam and rushed in. Hrafnkell lay in his bed, and him, together with all his housecarls, those who were able to bear weapons, they made prisoners, but women and children they drove all into one chamber. On the lawn there stood a storehouse, between which and the hall there was laid a beam for drying clothes on. Unto this storehouse they brought Hrafnkell and his men. He made many offers for himself and his people, and when that was not heeded, he asked the life of his men to be spared, for they have done nothing to offend you, but it is no shame to me to be killed, and from that I beg not to be excused. Only ill treatment I pray to be spared, for that is no honour to you. Thorkel said, We have heard that hitherto thou hast not let thyself be easily led by thy enemies, and it is now well that thou shouldst take a lesson for it today. Then they took Hrafnkell and his men, and tied their hands behind their back, whereupon they broke up the storehouse, and took down from pegs some ropes hanging there, and next they took out their knives, making slits through their how sinews, drawing therethrough the hopes which then they slung over the aforenamed beam, and there tied them up 8 together. Then said Thorgeir, Now thou hast been brought to such a plight, Hrafnkell, as thou deservest, unlikely as thou wouldst have deemed it, that thou shouldst ever have received such a shame at any man's hands as has now come to pass. Now which wilt thou do, Thorkel? Sit here beside Hrafnkell and watch them, or go outside the farmstead with Samur within the distance of an arrow shot, and there execute the act of distress on some stony knoll where there be neither field nor meadow. This was to be done at the time when the sun was in due south. Thorkel answered, I will sit there beside Hrafnkell, and thus have less to do. Then Thorgeir and Samur executed the act of distress. Now after this they walked home, and took down Hrafnkell and his men, and set them down in a field, and then blood had already filled their eyes. Then said Thorgeir to Samur that he should now deal with Hrafnkell as he liked, for meseems it is now a matter of small difficulty to deal with him. Then answered Samur, 2 choices are set before thee, Hrafnkell, one to be taken outside the stead, together with those of thy men that I choose, and to be slaughtered. But whereas thou hast a great number of useless mouths to provide for, I will allow thee to look there too. So the second choice is, if thou wilt have thy life, that thou betake thyself from Athelball with all thy folk, and with so much money only as I shall share to thee, which shall be mighty little, but I shall settle on thy property, and have the rule of all thy men. And to neither shalt thou ever raise a claim, nor thy heirs, nor shalt thou ever live nearer this place than somewhere to the east of Flottsjalsherad, and this thou mayest hansel me if thou art ready to accept it. Hrafnkell answered, Many a man would think a swift death better than such hard dealings, but belike I shall fare after the manner of many, that life be chosen while choice there is, which I do, mostly because of my sons, for theirs will be a scanty prospect if I die from them. Then Hrafnkell was let loose, and he hanselled self-doom unto Samur. Samur allowed Hrafnkell so much of the wealth as he chose, which was a slight portion indeed. His spear Hrafnkell retained, but no weapon besides. And this very day he betook himself from Athelbol together with all his folk. Then said Thorkel to Samur, I wonder at thy doing this, for no man will regret more than thyself having given Hrafnkell his life. Samur said that could not be helped now. Chapter 14. Hrafnkell brought his household east over Flottsdalsherad and right across Flottsdar unto the eastern side of Lagerflot. At the bottom of that water stood a small stead, which was called Lochulla. This land Hrafnkell bought on credit, for his means went no further than to cover the cost of household implements. People had much talk about this, how Hrafnkell's masterfulness had suddenly come down to naught, and many a man now recalls the ancient saw, Short is the age of overboldness. This was a good woodland, and large in extent, but the house was a poor one, and therefore he bought the land at a low price. But Hrafnkell spared no cost. He felled the wood, which was large, and raised there a lofty abode, which since has been called Hrafnkell Stather, and has always been accounted of as a good stead. During the first seasons Hrafnkell lived there in battle with hard distress. He had much ado in storing his home with fish. He went much about common labour while the stead was being built. The first half year he embarked on the winter with one calf and one kid, but it turned out well for him, so that nearly everything lived in the way of livestock, which was added to it, and it might be said that nearly every creature was with two heads. That same summer there happened to be a large catch in Lagerflut, which brought the householders of the countryside many a comfort, and this held on well every summer. Chapter 15. Somr set up his house as Athelbol after Hrafnkell, and set up a great banquet there, and invited to him all those who formerly had been Hrafnkell's retainers. Samur offered to be the lord over them instead of Hrafnkell, and they accepted the offer, although they had various misgivings about the matter. The sons of Theostar counselled him to be bounteous on his money, and helpful to his men, and a support to whomever might be in want. And then they are not men if they do not faithfully follow thee in whatever thou mayest stand in need of. But this we counsel thee therefore, that we should like to see thee successful in all things, for thou seemest to us to be a stalwart man. Now take care of thyself, and be wary of thy ways, for evil foes 'tis hard to heed. The sons of Theostar sent for Freymane and the stud, said they would like to see the beasts of which there were so many stories abroad. Then the horses were brought home, and they were viewed by the brothers. Thorgeir said, "These horses seem to me to be serviceable to the household, and it is my counsel that they be made to work all they can in the service of man until they can no longer live by reason of old age. But this horse Freymane seems to be no better than other horses, nay, the worse indeed, that he has brought many an evil thing about. And I will not that he be the cause of any more manslaughters than he has been already. So it is fittest that he be received by him who owns him." Now they led the horse down the field. Beside the river there stood a precipitous rock, and below it there was a deep eddy in the river, and so they led the horse forth unto the rock. The sons of Chostar wound a certain cloth over the head of the horse, tied a stone around its neck, and thereupon seized long poles, wherewith they thrust the horse over the precipice, and destroyed him so. Sithence this rock is called Freymane's rock. Above it stands the temple which Hrafnkell had. Thorkel wished to come there, and he let strip all the gods, and after that he set the temple on fire, and burnt thereup everything together. After that the guests prepared to leave, and Samr presented the brothers with things most precious, and they bespoke a firm friendship between them, and thereupon parted the best of friends. After this they rode west to the Firths, and arrived in Thorskafjordr in great honour. Samr settled Thorbjorn in the house at Lake Scalar, where he was to keep house. But the wife of Samr went to his house at Athelbol, where he farmed for a while. Chapter 16. The news was brought east into Flotesdalar to Hrafnkell that the sons of Chostar had destroyed Freymane and burnt the temple. Then said Hrafnkell, "I deem it a vain thing to believe in the gods," and he vowed that henceforth he would set his trust in them no more. And to this he kept ever afterwards, and never made a sacrifice again. Now Hrafnkell sat in Hrafnkell Stather, raking money together fast. He became a much honoured man in the countryside, and everyone chose to sit and stand as it pleased him. At that time there was a great going of ships from Norway to Iceland, and people were taking up claims in the country as fast as might be during Hrafnkel's days. No one might settle freely in Hrafnkel's countryside without his leave, and all those who settled had to promise him their aid, against which he promised his protection. Thus he brought under himself all the men on the eastern side of Lagerflot. This jurisdiction soon became much more thickly peopled than that which he had ruled over before, stretching all the way up Skriðudal, as well as up all along Lagerflot. Now his mind, too, had undergone a change. He was much better liked than heretofore. He was still of the same temper as to helpful husbandry and lordly household ways, but now the man was much milder and meeker in all things than ever before. He and Samr often met at public meetings, but never a word fell betwixt them as to their former dealings. In this manner 6 winters passed away. Samr was also well liked among his retainers, for he was gentle and quiet and ready to help, and bore in mind always the counsel which those brothers had given him. He too was a man of much splendour in outfit and raiment. Chapter 17. It is stated that there came a certain ship into Hreafjordr, the master of which was Eyvindr Bjarnson, who had been abroad for 7 winters together. Eyvindr had bettered himself greatly as to manners, and had now become the briskest of men. Now he soon was told of the tidings which had come to pass, and he made as if he took little heed thereof, being a man of unmeddlesome ways. When Samr heard this, he rode to the ship, and a great joyful meeting there was between the brothers. Samr asked him to come up west to his place, and Eyvindr accepted it, and bade Samr ride home first, and afterwards sent him horses for his chattels. He hauled his ship aland and made her snug. Now Samr did as Eyvindr bade, and went home and had horses sent down to meet Eyvindr, and when he had made his chattels ready for the journey, he set off into Hrafnkelsdalar, riding up along Hreafjordr. There were 5 in company together, and the 6th there was an attendant of Eyvindr, an Icelander by kin, and a relative of his. This youth Eyvindr had redeemed from poverty, and brought him now home in his own company, and had done to him as to himself, which good deed of Eyvindr was loudly praised, and the common talk was that few people could be found to match him. Now they rode up along Thorsdalsheathi, driving before them 16 horses loaded. They were there together, 2 of Samr's house carls, and 3 of the sailors, all arrayed in vari-coloured clothes, and carrying glittering shields. They rode along Skriðudalr, and across the neck, over the countryside, and unto Flotdalar, to a spot called Bullinjarvelar, and thence unto the shining flats of Gilsaw, a river that flows into the Float from the east, between Hallomstaðr and Hrafnkelsstaðr. Then they rode up along Lagerflot, down below the home field of Hrafnkelsdalar, and thus round the upper end of the water, crossing Juhulska at the ford of Skali. This was midway between the hour of rising and the hour of day meal. A certain woman was there by the waterside washing her linen, and seeing the men travelling, the handmaiden gathers up her linen and rushes homeward. The linen she threw down beside a certain pile of wood, running into the house herself. At this time Hrafnkell was not up as yet. His chosen men lay about in the hall, but the workmen had already gone each about his business, the time being the haymaking season. Now when the maiden came in, she took up the wood, saying, "Sooth indeed are most of the old saws, so one grows craven as one grows old. That honour mostly cometh to but little, which, beginning early, is allowed to drop into dishonour, the bearer having no courage to wreak his right at any time, and such must be held a great wonder in a man who once upon a time has had bravery to boast of. Now the thing is changed. Those who grow up with their fathers and are deemed as of no worth against you, yet when they grow up in another country, they are deemed of the greatest worth in whatever place they show themselves, and come back again from abroad and hold themselves better even than any chieftains. Now Eyvindr Bjarnson has just crossed the river at the ford of Skuli, riding with a shield so fair that it beamed again. Surely he is so much of a man as to be worth taking in revenge. These things the handmaiden said in great eagerness of temper. Hrafnkell rose and answered her. Maybe the words thou speakest are only too true, not because that thou meanest anything good thereby, but it is well that thou have something for thy ado, and go forthwith as hard as thou canst run, south to Wiedfeller, to the sons of Holstein, Siegvater and Snorri, and bid them at once come to me with as many men as they have about them able to wear weapons. Another maiden he sent down to Hrolfstadr to fetch the sons of Hrolfr, Thorder, and Hali, together with such men as might happen to be there able-bodied. All these were the stoutest of men, and were skilled in all manly parts. Hrafnkell also sent for his house carls, and thus they were at least 18 together. They armed themselves trustily, and rode across the river where the others had crossed it before. Chapter 18. By this time Eyvindr and his men had got up upon the heath, and on he rode until he had crossed the heath halfway, and he had come to a spot called Bessagotur, where there is a boggy mire like a slough to ride through, where the horses waded all the way knee deep, haunch deep, and even belly deep, but underneath the bottom was as hard as a frozen earth. On the western side of this bog is a large lava, and when they had got up upon the lava, the youth looked back and said to Eyvindr, Some men there be riding after us, no less than 18 in number, among whom there is one, a big man on his horse, riding in blue raiment, and to me he seems to bear the likeness of Hrafnkell the priest, although I have not seen him now for a long while. Eyvindr answered, What is that to us? I know nothing whereby I need fear the anger of Hrafnkell, having never done aught to offend him. No doubt he has some errand into the next valley, desiring, maybe, to go see his friends. The youth answered, My mind bodes me that he be minded to meet thee. I am not aware, says Eyvindr, that aught has happened between him and my brother Samr since their atonement. The youth answered, I wish thou wouldst ride away west to the dale, where thou shalt be in safety. But I know so much of Hrafnkell's temper that he will do nothing to us if he should miss thee, for if thou alone be safe, then all things are well to be seen. Then there will be no bear to tug along, and that is well, whatsoever may become of us. Eyvindr said he felt no desire to ride so hurriedly away, for I know not who the men may be, and many a man would find the matter good to laugh at if I should run away before it come to any trial at all. Now they rode west over the lava, when they came upon another mire called Oxamire, a grassy spot, with bogs which are all but impassable. Hence old Hallfroider struck the higher tracks, though they were longer. Now Eyvindr rode westward into the bogland, where the horses came by, plentifully weltering in the mire, and they were much delayed because thereof. The others, riding loose, quickly covered the ground, and Hrafnkell and his men rode their way towards the bogland. And just as Eyvindr had got over the bogs, he saw that there was come Hrafnkell and both his sons. Now Eyvindr's men bade him ride away, now all trammels are past, and thou wilt have time to reach Athelball, while the bogland lies between thee and Hrafnkell. Eyvindr answered, I mean not to fly away from any man to whom I never did any harm." So now they rode upon the neck of the land where some small hills rise above the ground. On this neck, spurring off from the mountain, there was a certain hummock and a windswept place surrounded by high banks. Up to this spot Eyvinder rode, and got there off his horse and waited for them. Then Eyvinder said, "Now we shall soon know their errand." After this they betook themselves up on the hummock, where they broke some stones. Now Hrafnkell turned off the road, making for the hummock. Without accosting Eyvinder with a word, he set on them forthwith. Eyvinder defended himself well and manfully, but his attendant, not deeming himself the stoutest of men for fighting, took his horse and rode west over the neck to Athelbol, and told Samur what was going on. Samur bestowed himself quickly, gathering men together, so that there was 20 of them in a band, and right well armed following he had. Now Samur rode eastward unto the heath, and to the spot where the fight had stood, and saw how matters had come about between them, and how Hrafnkell rode eastward again from his work, Eyvinder lying there fallen, and all his men. The first thing Samur did was to try if there still lingered life in the body of his brother, and carefully he was searched, but they had all lost their lives, 5 of them together. Of Hrafnkell's men, 12 had fallen, but 6 had been able to ride away. Now Samur made a short stay here, and rode together with his men in pursuit of Hrafnkell, who rode away as fast as they could on their weary horses. Then said Samur, "We shall be able to overtake them, they having their horses jaded, ours being all fresh, yet it will be a hard thing to reach them, though probably, if they cross the heath before, it will be at a close shave." At this time Hrafnkell had passed Oxamire again to the eastward. Now both parties ride until Samur reaches the brow of the heath, and saw that Hrafnkell had already got far down the slopes, and perceived that he will be able to fly away into the countryside, and said, "Now here we must return, for Hrafnkell will have no lack of men to help him." And so Samur returns, a thing thus done, and came back to the spot where Eyvinder was lying, and set about throwing up a howe over Eyvinder and his followers. In these parts, even to this day, the hummock is called Eyvinder Hummock, the mountains Eyvinder Hills, the valley Eyvinder Dale. Chapter 19. Now Samur brought all the chattels home to Athelbol, and when he came home Samur sent for his retainers to be there with him the next morning by the hour of day-meal, being minded to set off eastward over the heath. And let our journey now take its own turn. In the evening Samur went to bed, and a goodly gathering of people there was there. Hrafnkell rode home and told the tidings that had befallen. Having partaken of a repast, he gathers to him men, even to the number of 70, with which gathering he rides west over the heath, and coming unawares upon Athelbol, he took Samur in his bed, and had him brought out. Then Hrafnkell spoke. "Now thy conditions have come to such a pass, Samur, as surely a short while ago thou wouldst not have believed. I having now in my hand the power of thy life. Yet I shall not deal with thee in more unmanly manner than thou didst to me. Now 2 conditions I put before thee. One, to be slain. The other, that I should settle and arrange all things between you and me." Samur said that he would rather choose to live, though he well knew that that condition would be hard enough. To that Hrafnkell bade him to be sure to make up his mind, for that is a requital I owe thee, and I should deal with thee better by half, if thou art worthy of it. Thou shalt be off from Athelbol, and betake thee to Lake Scholar, and there set up thy house. Thou shalt take with thee all the wealth that belonged to Eyvinder, but from hence thou shalt take with thee of money's worth so much as thou didst bring hither, that only shalt thou bring away. I shall overtake again my priesthood, and my house, and my property, and great as I see the increase of my wealth has grown, thou shalt enjoy naught thereof notwithstanding. For Eyvinder thy brother nowhere guilt will be forthcoming, even for this reason, that thou didst plead so provokingly after thy kinsman. For thou hast indeed had plentiful were-guilt for Einar, thy relation, in having enjoyed my rule and my wealth for 6 years together. But the slaying of Eyvinder and his men I value no more than the mutilation wrought on me and my men. Thou didst drive me out of my countryside, but I am content that thou abide at Lake Scholar, and that will do for thee, if thou rush not into overboldness that may bring about thy shame. My underling, thou shalt remain while we are both alive. Be thou sure of this, too, that things shall fare the worse with thee the more ill dealings we have together. Now Samur went away with his folk down to Lake Scholar, and there set up his household. Now Hrafnkell committed his household of Athelbol to his chosen men, and on Thorir his son he settled his house at Hrafnkell but he himself had the priesthood over all these countrysides, and his son Osbjorn, being younger, remained with him. Chapter 20. Now Samur sat at Lake Scholar this winter. He was few spoken and unmeddlesome, and many people found that he was right ill content with his lot. But in the winter, when the days began to lengthen, Samur rode in company with another man, having a train of 3 horses, across the bridge, and then onward across the heath of Muthraldalr, thence again across Jökulsá of the ferry to Múvatn, thence across the Flotshady and past Lósavatn's pass, never halting on his way until he made Thorskafjörður, where a good cheer was made for him. At that time Thorkel had just arrived from a journey abroad, having spent 4 winters together in foreign lands. Samur stayed there for a week, giving himself some rest. He now told him of all the dealings between himself and Hrafnkell, and charged the brothers to lend him now, as before, their aid and avail. This time Thorgeir was chief spokesman on his own and his brother's behalf. Said he was settled afar. The way between us is a long way indeed, and before we left thee we thought we had made matters snug enough for thee, so much so that it would have been an easy matter for thee to maintain thyself. But now things have come to what I foretold thee when thou gavest life to Hrafnkell, that would be the matter of thy sorest regret. I urged thee to take Hrafnkell's life, but thou wantest to have thy way. Now it is easy to see the disparity of wisdom there is between ye two. He allowing thee to sit in peace all along, and only seized the chance of attack when he saw his way to destroying him in whom he deemed there was a greater man than in thyself. Now we may nowise allow thy lucklessness to be the bringer about of our ruin, nor have we any such eager desire to plunge into a strife with Hrafnkell again, as that we should want to risk our honour in that matter again. But we are willing to offer thee to come here with all thy relatives, and are ready to afford thee our protection, shouldst thou find thy mind more at ease here than in the neighbourhood of Hrafnkell. Samur said he was not of a mind to close such a bargain, said he wanted to be home again, and bade them afford him relay horses, which was granted him forthwith. The brothers wanted to give Samur good gifts, but he would take none such, rejoined only that they were men of little hearts. Now Samur rode home into his house at Lake Scholar, where he lived unto old age, nor ever, as long as he lived, did he get a redress against Hrafnkell. But Hrafnkell sat at home and maintained his lordly title until he died in his bed. His howe is in Hrafnkell's Dalar, down below Athelbol. In this howe there was laid down great wealth, all his armour and his good spear. His sons stepped into his rule, Thorir dwelling at Hrafnkell's Stathar, and Osbjorn at Athelbol, both owning the priesthood conjointly, and were deemed to be right mighty men of their hands. And here the tale of Hrafnkell cometh to a close.